When the lock was full, they would close the wickets, open the gate, and move the boat into the lock. So we're going to pretend there's water in here. There's lots of water. And then they would close the gate behind them, and they would open the wickets in the next gate. So you would open up those wickets, and the water would empty out. As the water emptied out, the boat would go down and down and down. See how that worked? Okay, and then you would close these wickets, open the gate, move the boat in there, open those wickets, and he would go down again. Now, if he was going uphill, you bring him in here, and you open these wickets, the water comes in and raises him up. Now, as we go down the street, you're going to be seeing buildings that were built during the canal period. The house up there on the hill was built in 1878. It was the home of Mr. Gleason, who had the sawmill down by the basin. This house here was built in the 1840s. The brick ones are the oldest. Back at that time, they didn't have machines that made bricks. They had to make the bricks by hand. Can you imagine how much time it would take and how much work it would take if you had to make every one of those bricks by hand? Oh, goodness. We had our own brickyard here in Roscoe. We also had our own stone quarry.
Okay.
An ugly old scarecrow.
Look at this.
Now, I'm gonna turn on the light so we can see better. And evidently that scarecrow has some sort of a thing. And he's using our plug in there, isn't he? Alright, now, you remember I said they didn't have factories yet, and they didn't have any kind of machinery. So, everything that people needed had to be made by hand, with simple hand tools. You remember the guys that are working on the canal and building stuff. So, one very, very, very important craftsman you would have in town was a blacksmith. Anytime you wanted something made out of iron or steel, you would come to the blacksmith. This was like the hardware store of the 1800s, okay? The blacksmith made horseshoes and shoed horses. He made all sorts of metal pieces and parts, rings and hooks. They made chains, one link at a time. They made nails, one at a time. They made door latches and door hinges. They made knives. Okay, over here we've got a knife that the blacksmith has made. They made knives, and they made tools. Here's a tool that was made by the blacksmith. They made knives and tools, and anything that was made out of iron or steel would have been made by the blacksmith. Now, other kinds of metal had different guys who would make stuff out of them. So the blacksmith made things out of iron or steel. You also had coppersmiths, tinsmiths, silversmiths, and goldsmiths. Now, you would only have a silversmith or a goldsmith in a big city where people were rich, okay? In a small town, you would mostly have blacksmiths and tinsmiths. Here in Roscoe, back in the 1800s, we had a blacksmith and a tinsmith. Now, because of the fact that steel is so hard, you have to heat it and make it soft in order to change the shape of it. So the blacksmith has to have a fire. The special fireplace that the blacksmith uses is called a forge. And we've got coal. We've got coal in the fire here. And this thing here is a blower. So you can imagine that the fire is going. And the blower blows air through there and makes it hotter. Our piece of steel needs to be about 1,800 degrees, which is 1,800. Okay? 1,800 degrees is what we need. So, you stick your piece of steel in the forge, and when it's a nice bright orange, you can tell how hot it is by the color. See here? When it's 1,000 degrees, it starts getting red. And then it gets redder and brighter and redder. And then when it's 1,800, it turns orange. So you can pretend that this piece is orange. And then you can hammer it on the anvil, and you can flatten it if you want to. Or if you want to bend it, you can put it in here and you can bend it. So you can make it however you want it to be. And while you're working, it cools off. So pretty soon you have to heat it back up again. So you heat it, and you hammer it, and you heat it some more, and you hammer it some more. And you just have to keep doing that again and again until you manage to make whatever it is you want to make. Okay? So the blacksmith has his fire, the forge, and this thing here is called an anvil. And that's his workbench, basically. And then he's got a whole bunch of hammers.
Daddy.
What?
Pay attention. Stop. We will do it.
Does he have a question?
No.
Okay. The blacksmith had all kinds of hammers. He had big hammers and little hammers. Look at this one.
See that?
That's really heavy. You want to see if you can hold it?
I want to hold it.
No, okay.
On weekends, do you actually have a blacksmith doing demonstrations?
Yes, during the summer between Memorial Day and Labor Day, there's somebody in here every day making stuff. Okay? And so the blacksmith had all different kinds of hammers. He also had different kinds of tongs. Okay? If the piece of steel is at least 1 foot long, you can hold it with your hand. But if it's shorter than that, you have to hold it with tongs, like this. See, because it's really, really hot, so you can't touch it. So you have to hold it with the tongs, and then you bring it over here, and you can hammer it, or whatever. But if it's too small, if it's too short, you have to have tongs to hold it with. Okay? Those are the blacksmith's basic tools. Any questions? 1910 and 1913, it was purchased by a blacksmith and made into a blacksmith shop.
See, we don't have old buildings like this in Florida.
What?
We don't have old buildings like this in Florida.
Okay, let's get some light on in here so we can see what we're doing. Let's put a light on in the cupboard. Here's a couple more. All right, now, back in the 1800s, if you had a print shop and you wanted to print a newspaper or a book or something like that, you would be using movable type. Movable type means you have a separate piece for every letter that you want to print.
This is the letter F.
Uh-huh. They had all different kinds. They had plain ones, they had fancy ones. Look how fancy this one is. It's got flowers and leaves and all kind of scrolly stuff. That's an E. And the letters had to be backwards. Did you notice that that E is backwards? And the S is backwards? The letters all had to be backwards. And for every different size and every different style, you had to have a whole set. If I'm going to print a page in a book, do I need more than one A? Yeah. I need lots of A's, I need lots of B's, I need lots of every single letter. And so they had these special drawers that would hold all of their type pieces. Okay?
Here's the letter R. That starts my first day.
Oh, okay.
Don't touch them, right?
It's all right. Here. It's okay. Now, the problem is they would have had lots of drawers. As a matter of fact, there's one that doesn't belong in there. Wait, it doesn't belong there either. Where's the spaces? Is that spaces?
This
Over
one.
here. Okay. I've never memorized the drawer. I should, but I haven't. So there's another small piece. Now, what they would do is they had to memorize where each letter is supposed to be. See, they had a special kind of drawer. Each letter has its own little cubby hole. They had to memorize where the letters all go. See, you would have to memorize that the capital R is like in this space here, if you wanted one. And my grandson's name starts with a G. So you would have to memorize, he would have to memorize where the G's are. And so they had to remember where all the letters are, because they wouldn't have had these cute little labels. Okay? Lots of drawers, no labels. So you would have to memorize it. So then what you would do is you would take a composing stick and you would spell the letters out of the drawer one by one and arrange them to say whatever it is you wanted to say. When you had a whole line done, you would transfer that over into this three-sided tray, which was called a galley. And so you would build your page in the galley, line by line by line, from here to here to here.
Could you just gone from the letters to this? Could you have just gone from the letters to this?
Oh, well, let's say you're doing a whole big line. This thing here was adjustable. You could...
It's to make it even, so it's not, crooked.
So, yeah. Anyway, you would transfer the letters one by one into here, and then the whole line by line into here. Once you had all the words in there, you might want to add a picture. So let's say we were going to tell a story about a cowboy. So you would need a picture of a cowboy. Or if you wanted to tell a story about a little boy who's teaching his doggy how to sit. See? You might use this one.
What's this one?
That's a hobby horse. Let's pretend we were telling a story about a little boy who gets a hobby horse for Christmas.
There's a person at the desk is on the
See?
This one.
Oh, this is a famous person. Let's see if Daddy knows who this is. It's Ben Franklin.
Oh, okay.
If we wanted to tell a story about Ben Franklin, okay? Or let's say we wanted to tell a story about a kitty cat. I've got one of a kitty cat. Do you like that? Or if I want to tell a story about an owl. Ooh, ooh. And so I could pick out, whoops, I could pick out one of these. Oh, there you go. I could pick out one of these that goes with my story. Let's see, I want to tell a story about a lady, a fancy lady, sitting on a bench with a parasol. See? Or let's say I wanted to tell a story about a blacksmith. See? There he is working. And so in the town, in the print shop, they would have a whole collection of different kinds of print blocks that they could use to go with their story. Okay? Once you had everything arranged in here, the words and the pictures and everything, then you would carefully empty everything out of the galley onto the table. Then you would take one of these metal frames, which was called a chase, and you would carefully put the chase around the type. Then you would fill up the rest of the empty spaces with these wooden pieces, which were called furniture. And so they also had cupboards full of furniture, all different sizes. Then you would take these little metal wedges, which were called coins, and you would put those in the last empty spaces between the furniture, and you would... Okay, these were called coins, but they're not like pennies or nickels, okay? It's actually a French word, and these were evidently invented by the French, and these were put, you would put that in the last empty space there between the furniture, and you would tighten those in with your coin key. And when you put those in and tighten it up, everything would be tight so that they wouldn't fall out when you picked it up. Okay? Any questions? This is an oak tree. And boy, did it have a bunch of acorns this year. Lots and lots of. This lady here is going on a trip, I guess. Now, the state of Ohio spent approximately $14 million to build the canal. That was an awful lot of money back at that time, and so they needed to get some of it back. Well, as much as possible. So they began collecting a toll or tax from the people who used the canal. The toll collector here in Roscoe was a fellow named Jacob Welsh, and he built this little house here in 1840. We think that he and his family probably lived in the upstairs and maybe had his toll office down in the cellar, which opens up in the back there where the canal was. Okay? And he would get on your boat and he would figure out how much you owed depending on the goods that you were carrying. So he would just add everything up depending on the stuff that you were hauling. Okay? This building is a warehouse, and the canal actually came right up to the back of it, and they could load and unload goods in there. They also had a general store on the street level where people could come and buy whatever stuff, the latest stuff that had come on the canal. Okay? And the building across the street was the hotel.
So there's no pretend general store here.
Yeah, we have another general store. This one, of course, used to be a general store, but it's now a restaurant. But there's a general store down here also. And I believe it was one already years and years ago. looks like the doggy wants to chase the mailman.
Scarecrow. Scarecrows usually scarecrow.
These are silly, aren't they? Silly scarecrow. I don't even think the crows would be scared of him. Now, Roscoe Village had a doctor. His name was Morrow. Whoops, this way. His name was Morrow Johnson, and the house where he lived was built in 1833. Okay? And this is going to be an example of what a rich person's house would be like back at that time. Okay, come on in here. Now, a long time ago, you remember we said they didn't have any electricity. And so people had to use candles to light their rooms. And they didn't have furnaces yet either. So they had to heat their house with fireplaces. When you go through this house, you will notice that every single room has a fireplace. Okay? And that's the way they had to do to keep warm in the wintertime. This house was built in 1833. We have the original floors and the original fireplaces, and all the rest has been restored the way they think it might have been. Up here on the mantle, we have a picture of Dr. Johnson. This is the man who lived here back a long time ago. He was the doctor on Roscoe. His wife's name was Eliza, and they had 4 children. 3 girls and 1 boy. Long time ago, there was one little boy who lived here. He had 3 sisters. Poor kid. Okay. Now, up here on the mantle, we have a clock. Remember I said they didn't have any electricity. There's no electric. There's no batteries. You had to wind it. It had a fancy little key. And to keep it going, you had to open it up and you had to wind it, okay? And that would keep it going. And these little things here are called spills. Back in the day before they had matches, they didn't even have matches yet. And so back in the day before they had matches, the children would take newspaper and wrap it up into a tube like a straw. And you could use it to light your candle from the fireplace. So if you wanted to light your candles, they didn't have a match. So you had to get some fire from your fireplace, and then you would light the candles, okay, with your spills. Now, a long time ago, tea was very, very expensive. Only rich ladies could have tea parties, okay? But a rich lady might have one of these lovely china sets, and the teacups in those days were made with no handles because they were copied from Chinese tea bowls. And it became fashionable to pour your tea in a saucer, put your cup on a cup plate, and drink out of the saucer. Silly, I know. Fashions usually are. It was also fashionable at that time for a lady to have a pale complexion. So she had company and wanted to sit by the fire. She would hold a face fan in front of her face to keep her face from getting all flushed and red. Also, they had makeup that contained beeswax, and you wouldn't want your face to get too warm, or it might start to drip. So that's all silly stuff they would do. This thing here is a little desk, and this is a little sander they would use to sprinkle fine blotter sand on their paper to help dry their ink. They had to write. They didn't have pens yet. They had to write with a quill pen and they had to dip it in a bottle of ink, and it was very messy. The organ is a Mason Hamlin from 1850 or 60, and the shawl is actually a silk shawl that belonged to Eliza herself. The portraits on the wall are Eliza's grandparents. No, it's actually her grandmother. Okay. Now the neat thing about the organ is today we have music everywhere, don't we? You go in the store and there's music in the store. You hear people going down the street, there's music in their car. People have got earplugs in their ears and they're listening to music everywhere they go. Back in the old days, they didn't have any of those things. They didn't have televisions, they didn't have CD players, they didn't even have record players. The only kind of music you would have back in the old days is if you could actually play a musical instrument yourself. Think about that, how special that would be.
Yeah, because if you have the wizardry, you can't play music with a CD player.
No, they didn't have any of those things.
Yeah, so you have to play music by yourself on the instrument.
Right. They had to learn how to play a trumpet or a clarinet or an organ or a violin or something. They had to learn how to play all those instruments if they wanted to have music. Now this room here is the formal dining room. Only rich people are going to have a special dining room. The sideboard, the table, and the chairs are from 1830, and they're made of tiger maple. He's okay. Come here a minute. I'll show you something. See the pretty stripes in this wood? Isn't that pretty? That kind of wood is called tiger maple because it has stripes in it, like a tiger. See, there's stripes here, there's stripes there. This kind of furniture was very special. Okay? And the brass chandelier is also an original from 1830, only it would have had real candles in it back in those days. Somebody has stuck a wire in there and made it electric. But it wasn't back in the 1800s, okay? And most of the china in the cupboards would be the kind that would be imported from England, because that was considered the best back at that time. The little box on the mantle is a tea caddy. You remember I said tea was very, very expensive? Tea was so expensive, they locked it up in a box, like a jewelry box. It was also very popular to have a portrait of George Washington in your home. Do you have a picture of George Washington in your home? No. Well, back in the old days they did. Back in the old days it was very popular to have a picture of George Washington in your home. And this thing here is a fly trap. Now back in the 1800s they didn't have screens on the windows yet. Okay, no screens. So if you open the window in the summertime to get some fresh air, you would end up with a bunch of flies and other bugs in the house. So you would put a little honey or sorghum inside here on the inside of the glass. The flies would sneak in through the bottom, and then they wouldn't be able to find their way back out. They would be stuck. It's a fly trap. And back in the old days, all the little girls had to learn how to sew. Even rich girls had to learn how to sew. But the difference is, the poor girls are going to be sewing their own clothes. The rich girls are going to do fancy embroidery. They could take their piece of material to a painter, and they could have him paint on it whatever they wanted. Maybe a scene from their favorite story. And then they would embroider over top of the painting all the details that they wanted to add to it. Is that special or what? Take a lot of time, a lot of patience. Because they didn't have TV. Okay? If you would like to go upstairs and look at the bedrooms,
Okay.
Usually I just send people up there, but maybe I'll go with you so I can
Alright.
point out the toys.
Okay.
Be careful you don't bump your head.
All right.
Make sure the door is locked. Now, back in the old days, they didn't have toy stores like we do now. Most people would have made handmade toys. Let's go in here first. Long time ago, they would have handmade, homemade toys.
Want to see their toys?
Okay. Sweetie, can you, let me see. Can you sit in the fence there? Look in the back room there, they've got a whole bunch of toys. Now, a lot of
Look
those,
at the toy right there.
yeah, that's Noah's Ark. And Noah's Ark
Another
would have
Noah's
all
Ark toy.
kinds of little animals. See the little carved animals? There are more of them inside. They didn't put them all out. But the roof comes off. The roof comes off and you can store all your little carved animals inside there. Do you see the little toy drum? There on the little stool, there's a toy drum. And there's a little bowl full of marbles. And in the back there's a bicycle. See what in the back? There's a bicycle. Tricycle, actually. These are butter molds. This is a lemon squeezer. And this is your potato masher. You'll notice that many of the kitchen utensils are made out of wood because they didn't have plastic. No plastic yet. And they would put their food in crocks, like that. Now they had glass, but glass was very, very expensive, so it was used very sparingly. And this thing here is a bee smoker. Beekeeping was very popular because sugar was expensive. Beeswax was nice for candles. This is an apple peeler. This is a large shredder you would use to shred your cabbage for sauerkraut. They ate lots of sauerkraut because it was one of the things that kept well in his crock. They also dried a lot of their fruits and vegetables to be used for the winter, especially corn and beans. And of course, carrots and potatoes and root vegetables could be kept in the root cellar. And this thing here is a sausage grinder. Just think of all that work they had to do.
There's
Phew.
no supermarket.
Because the doctor's oldest daughter's name was Sarah.
So that would be like Jason's credit.
Mm-hmm. They didn't have very much baby furniture back in the 1800s. They didn't have car seats, they didn't have playpens, they just had cradles and high chairs, and that was it.
That was the answer.
Is that the house?
Over
high
here.
chairs right
Over here's a high chair. We had high chairs. Only it didn't have a tray on it. You just would set it up to the table. Now, a housewife back in the 1800s is going to have to cook over a fire in the fireplace. Remember you said they didn't have ovens? They didn't have ovens or stoves, either one.
And they didn't have microwave.
Nope, no microwave. So you have to have a fire in the kitchen fire, and you would put your food in here, and then you would hang that over the fire. For everyday meals, they usually had soup or stew, because it was easier to have your meat and your vegetables all in the same pot. With your soup or stew, you might want some bread or some biscuits. Since they didn't have an oven, they would use a big pan like this, which was called a Dutch oven. This was called a Dutch oven. It has legs on the bottom. You would put hot coals underneath and hot coals on top. And this is my toaster. How you like my toaster? See? You put your pieces of bread in there like that, You have to stick it in front of the fire and toast your bread like that with the fire.
Do you even make your...
No, I just pretend. Just pretend. Now, this is a cone of sugar. This is the way they got their sugar in those days. And they would use their sugar nippers to scrape pieces of sugar off the cone. If you wanted it ground up, you had to do that yourself. These are coffee beans. The reason they're so pale is because they're not roasted yet. This is the way they came on the canal. You had to roast them yourself in your coffee bean roaster. Then you had to grind them yourself in your coffee grinder. Everything had to be done by scratch. And this little thing here was called a meat jack or spit clock. You would fasten the chain to the crane, hang your meat from the hook, and it had a key. You wind it up and it turned the meat around like a rotisserie. But this was probably a very expensive little gadget that most housewives wouldn't have. Here is called a tin kitchen. It was used to cook a large piece of meat like a ham or a turkey. This is what you would use to cook a big piece of meat like a turkey for Thanksgiving. You would put the turkey on the skewer and then you would turn it around and set the open part towards the fire. Now this is a dry sink. You remember I said they didn't have any plumbing? The dry sink was basically just a table that had sides built on it. There's no spigot, there's no drain. You have to carry buckets of water to do the dishes. You would do your dishes in a little pan or a tub, and when you're done, you have to haul the dirty water back outside and dump it in the garden. And this is a candle box. You would put your tallow candles in there to keep the mice from nibbling on them. And this is a dough box, and you would have to keep a lump of dough in there all the time as a starter because you can't buy yeast in nice little packets. And then in your free time, you're going to spin wool for socks. Or toboggans or mittens or something.
What are the stairs for outside?
Well, these are the stairs that come down from the front. Okay, this is the front of the house where the sidewalk is. Okay, I suspect that they put that sidewalk in there just so they could have a window.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because think how dark it would be down here without the lights.
Yeah.
They probably put that stairway there, not so much because they wanted to go out that way, but just so that they could have a window. The stair steps are kind of high, aren't they?
Another stair flower.
Yeah.
Yes, this is a jewelry store here. So they've made their scarecrow look like he's proposing to his girlfriend. And he's going to give her a fancy ring. Kind of clever, I guess. There's different people that are renting this building now than what it was last year. Last year they had a scarecrow sitting on the bench and he had a crow sitting on his shoulder. That was cute. That was cute. I don't know if they'll do the same thing this year or not.
Right.
Is that next building?
Yep.
I just wanted to throw away that trash. So we're gonna go in here. I don't know why there's a big mess there in front of the door, but now this was the home of Roscoe's weaver. His name was Daniel Boyd and his wife's name was Jane. They came here from Ireland in the early 1800s, and in 1825 they were married and they built this little house. The brick part there in the front is the oldest building we have restored. It's also the only one that's been moved from its original location. And the back part here was reconstructed from an old barn because it was common for a craftsman to have his shop built onto his house. Now in the early days, before sewing machines were invented, there was no such thing as a clothing store. Imagine, they didn't have any clothing stores. That's why the little girls had to learn how to sew, is because everybody had to make their own clothes. Except if you were rich, and then you could go to the tailor or the seamstress and have your clothing made for you. But everybody else had to learn how to make their own clothes. And if you go back even further, or you happen to be poor, you would first spin your own thread. Each family would have their own little flock of sheep and a spinning wheel. You would spin your own thread, and then you would bring it to the weaver, and he would weave it up for you into cloth. Okay? So the weaver would have a loom, such as this, and the first thing you have to do is you have to wrap a whole bunch of thread on that big spool in the back. Then you bring the thread across the top, and you thread each thread through one of these little things, which are called heddles. Each one of those heddles has a little hole in the middle, like the eye of a needle. And each one of those threads has to go through one of those. Then the harnesses are tied to the pedals at the bottom. See, down here? When you push on the pedals with your feet, it pulls two of the harnesses down. See? See, when I push the pedals, it pulls two of them down. The other two are pulled up by the pulleys, and that separates my threads into two parts. See? Part of the threads are pulled up, and part of the threads are pulled down. Then you take your shuttle, and you stick your shuttle through the space in the thread. See? The shuttle can go in between those threads that are up and down. And whatever thread you have on your shuttle gets put in between those threads that you have on the loom. See how the blue one gets put in between the white ones? And then you pack it in, and you change your pedals. And that switches the threads, and then you put your shuttle back the other way. And that's how you make cloth. That's how you make material. Okay? The weaver would make the material, and then the mommy would come and get the material and make their clothes. Okay? Now the person who lived here was not as rich as the doctor. Remember over at the doctor's house there was lots of rooms, dining room, parlor, 2 bedrooms, kitchen, lots of rooms. This little house here only has 2 rooms. 1 room to live in and 1 room to work in. But this is not a poor person's house, because a poor person back in the 1800s is going to live in a log cabin. A log cabin was not nearly as nice as a brick house. Sometimes log cabins even had dirt floors, okay? A poor person back in the old days might live in a log cabin with a dirt floor. They might not have any windows because glass was very expensive. And so the fact that this is brick and has windows and a floor is much nicer. And so
It's like I have windows at my house.
That's nice. Yeah. Yeah, windows are not as expensive now as they were back then. Thank goodness. So the kitchen is over there where the fireplace is, because you got to cook over the fire. So that's the kitchen over there, and this is the bedroom over here. Now the beds at that time were made out of rope. See, they didn't have springs yet. And so the beds were made out of rope, and when you slept in the bed, it would stretch out, and it would sag down in the middle. Well, every once in a while, your daddy would take the rope jack of the bed key, and he would tighten the rope. And that would make the bed more comfortable.
You had to sleep on top of rope. Is that look comfortable?
Well, actually, they would have a mattress then on top of the rope.
Guess what?
What?
My bed is made out of wood.
Ah, okay. And I bet you have a nice mattress.
And a mat is on top of the wood.
Right.
Yeah.
The wood holds the mat up.
Yeah.
Well, they had rope, and then they had the mattress on top of the rope. But the only trouble is they didn't have any mattress stores. So first you would have to take a piece of thick, heavy material and stuff it full of something. They made their own mattress. If they were rich, they'd have feathers in their mattress. But if they were poor, it might be hay or straw or corn husks or even leaves they would stuff in their mattress. And then the covers would go on top of that. Now the two coverlets that we have in here were actually made by Daniel Boyd himself, and they were given to us by his family. Unfortunately for Daniel, they began bringing factory-made cloth on the canal. By 1835, poor Daniel was beginning to get into debt because everybody was buying factory-made cloth and wearing factory-made cloth. And so he sold this little house in 1835 and he moved to a farm. He was possibly still leaving in the winters after that because these beautiful coverlets would have been popular clear up to the Civil War. But from that point on, he was probably just leaving in the winters. Okay?
Ride, do you know what that is? Yeah.
This is their party. Did you see any bathroom? They didn't have bathrooms.
No.
Remember I said they didn't have any plumbing? If you don't have plumbing, you don't have any sinks, you don't have any toilets, you don't have any bathtub, you don't have any showers.
And that's their bathroom.
Yes.
That's a toilet.
Yeah.
You go potty in that and then dump it out.
Now,
Where?
well, they would have had an outhouse. A long time ago, everybody had outhouses. An outhouse was basically just a little building, and there would be a little seat there, like a toilet seat, and there would just be a great big hole in the ground. And you would poop in the hole. You probably would just use this one during the night if it was really dark, or it was raining or snowing, or if there was some reason you didn't want to go to the outhouse during the night. Maybe you hear wolves howling in the woods nearby. So you could go
Well,
in there
at
during the
my
night.
house, we have a toilet.
Good. I'm really glad for you.
Where?
Okay, we're gonna go over here.
Where?
Let's go house.
What looks like back in a long time ago. This is what school looks like.
Yeah. And you guys can have a seat in one of the school desks.
Here, you can sit in the desk.
Just pick one.
have school in here. This building is one of our new ones, okay? The first school in Roscoe was held in 1826, and it was held in an empty room above a store. They used several different buildings until 1851. They elected the first school board, and they built a nice brick school.
Can we go upstairs?
No.
No, this building was originally built to be the first visitor center, and then when they built the bigger one up the street, they put the school in here. And the upstairs just has storage in it. Used to be offices. Okay, so there's just a bunch of junk up there. But these are the kind of desks that the children would have used back in the 1800s after the Civil War. We don't have any desks that would be pre-Civil War. But after the Civil War, they could have had desks like this. Now, back in the old days, a lot of children, especially the ones out in the countryside, would have gone to a one-room schoolhouse. Okay, and you would have everybody from the first grade clear up to the 8th grade in the same room. Now, you remember what a lot of trouble it was to print. So, they didn't have very many books. Books were very expensive. This is a copy of Noah Webster's spelling book. Noah Webster's spelling book was first published in 1783, and it had over 5,000 words in it. The reason it had so many words is because, since books were expensive, they all used the same one. They didn't have a different book for the first graders and a different book for every other grade. Each child would start at the beginning with the easy words, and then each year they would pick up where they left off the year before. And if a teacher had a bunch of really poor kids in the class, they would use the same book for reading and spelling. And they would just learn to read and spell the same ones at the same time. Then in 1836, McGuffey came out with his reading books, and they became very, very popular because they had nice stories and lots of pictures. After reading, the next most important subject was writing. You remember at the doctor's house I told you they had to write with a quill? Okay? Quills are actually just goose feathers. Okay? You would take a goose feather and you would trim the end of it to a point, and you had to keep dipping it in the ink like that. It was very messy and hard to write with. They would have had steel-pointed pens like this one after the Civil War. Okay? And of course they wrote in cursive. Now, after reading and writing, the next most important subject was arithmetic. These old arithmetic books were also intended to cover all 8 grades, and most of the problems are very, very practical. So, let me see here. I'm going to see if you can do a problem. Can you do a math problem? Yes, you can. Let's see. John had 1 raisin, and his sister gave him 3 more raisins. How many did he have then?
It's 1 plus 3. Use your fingers. What's 1 plus 3?
He had 1 raisin, and then he got 3 more raisins. Yes, very good, very good. Shall I give Daddy a hard problem?
I have one math.